Welcome back to our channel where we share updates and untold stories about Catherine, Princess of Wales and her royal family. Today we bring you some news. Breaking Parliament votes to strip Camilla's status, historic Westminster earthquake. There has been a political and constitutional earthquake in Westminster that has shaken the British monarchy to its core. A formal motion was presented before the House of Commons for the first time in living memory to talk about and amend Queen Camilla's official royal status. What started out as modest talk among those who worked at the palace and in politics turned into an amazing process in Parliament. It was the most serious threat to the position of a ruling consort in modern British history. When the news was made in the Commons, there was an unusual, startling silence. MPs who had been talking on benches pushed forward. The statement was straightforward and procedural, yet it had a deep meaning. The room quickly filled with a sort of official astonishment that this was not a little gimmick, but a measure that would work. People in charge of all the parties took the proposal seriously. This wasn't just about ceremonial niceties. Elected officials whose job it is to protect the crown and the authority of Parliament were openly challenging the legality and behavior of someone who had been officially recognized as Queen Consort. For a long time, the duties of a consort have been more based on tradition and custom than on law. Traditionally, the consort helps the sovereign with ceremonial obligations, public-facing tasks, and patronages, and is supposed to stay out of politics. The Queen Consort's public presence may help the monarch's soft power, while the palace's professional staff and crown advisors have taken care of the institutional details behind the scenes. But the motion and the circumstances that led to it made people all around the country talk about whether the current unwritten norms were strong enough to stop an unelected person from having an effect on constitutional choices, or at least making it seem like they did. The uproar was caused by secret files that political analysts unofficially called the Camilla dossier. These materials were apparently given to a limited number of MPs from both parties and senior members of Parliament. People who were informed on the dossier's contents say it included a combination of typed notes, handwritten notes on official letters, emails from within the palace that needed attention, and notes from meetings that happened over the course of many years. The documents, when put together, were more than just gossip. They provided a timeline, names, and apparent reasons that suggested the Queen Consort had intervened in subjects that were usually the responsibility of the sovereign, their private office, or senior crown workers. According to those who have seen the dossier, the most severe accusations were about how power was changing inside the royal family. Some long-serving servants and household officers who had worked for crown after crown, some of whom had decades of experience and institutional memory, were said to have been replaced or given other jobs. The papers say that certain people in charge were given new roles or promoted, and other duties that were usually handled by established authorities were given to those who were seen to be closer to Camilla's group. The dossier called these structural changes, meaning that there were not chaotic personnel changes, but a gradual replacement and reallocation of people to create a new center of advising authority in the palace. This kind of description was significant, since the monarchy operates partially via roles and rituals. The positions of the Lord Chamberlain Keeper of the Privy Purse, sergeants, private secretaries, and equerries all help to keep the institution going. Their responsibilities, although not legally defined, are essential for preserving the distinction between the sovereign's private affairs and the crown's governmental duties. The dossier's main point was that those lines had been moved not by law or public discussion, but by quietly changing the roles and responsibilities of people. The sources stated that politically sensitive parts of the dossier showed plans that appeared like they were meant to push William and Catherine, the Prince and Princess of Wales, to the side. The files featured instances of projects that the Princess of Wales was supposed to manage, but were mysteriously cancelled or given to someone else. There were notes detailing why such plans needed to be changed often because of scheduling or public image issues. The dossier claimed that initiatives supported by the Prince of Wales were often faced with opposition from unexpected places. In some cases, these voices of dissent could be traced back to those in the Queen's inner circle via a chain of written contacts. When looked at together, these stories revealed that what had been called a spontaneous redistribution of ceremonial tasks after a change in sovereign could have been caused, at least in part, by planned internal maneuvering. Some people thought that the roles were just changing as the next generation took on more responsibilities. However, the dossier and those who used it said that there was a coordinated effort to keep power and symbolic activity in a certain order that favored one set of priorities over another. The document also mentioned the Duke and Duchess of Sussex. People who viewed it claimed it included notes regarding meetings and talks in which the Queen Consort urged that Meghan Markle should not be allowed to return to public-facing royal duties. People inside said they were worried that the Duchess's homecoming may upset the carefully managed narrative that the older generation had ended up with. One annotated document that stood out said, "We must protect what we've built. No room for disruption now." Critics saw that sentence as proof that there was a plan to control the royal story by leaving out someone who was seen as unpredictable. The press reacted right away and strongly when the contents of the dossier got out to politicians and the media. The tabloids, who are constantly looking for a spectacular personal tale, employed colorful, sensational rhetoric such as "quiet coup" and "Windsor puppeteer." Broadsheets and constitutional analysts, on the other hand, looked at the institutional effects. Was this a breach of a basic constitutional assumption that members of the royal family, especially those with or near official titles, shouldn't try to influence state issues or push their own political agenda from behind the scenes? Members of Parliament, who had earlier hailed Camilla for bringing stability to the monarchy during tough times, suddenly started to speak out against her. They called the report inappropriate and potentially damaging to the crown, saying it was a transition from hearsay to proven habit. The papers gave names, dates, and a paper trail to what had formerly been spoken in secret. The dossier's strength was that it turned elite suspicion into legislative worry. The public fight also showed that there was a deeper divide inside the royal family itself. People had long said that Prince William's relationship with Camilla was polite, but not warm. This was partly because of the loss of Diana and the difficult emotional landscapes that followed. William had publicly acknowledged Camilla's position, especially after his father became king. Privately, there had been friction for a long time, and things became worse when Camilla became more visible and important once she officially became Queen Consort. People close to William stated that following the coronation and the official acceptance of Camilla as queen, she became more involved in family and institutional concerns at a faster pace. William saw. The dossier and the people who sent it around said that some of the increased activity included questioning Catherine's readiness for more responsibilities and trying to reassign or weaken the initiatives she was in charge of. William's close friends and family didn't see them as impartial policy arguments. They saw them as intentional efforts to stop the princess from becoming more popular and powerful. When William heard rumors of criticism coming from advisors close to the Queen, he asked for a private meeting with Camilla. People who were there said it wasn't a social ceasefire. It was a brutal, essential fight. The Prince of Wales is said to have told the Queen in no uncertain terms that he would respond firmly to any attempts to hurt his family. A close friend reported a different version of the conversation. William said to her, "You might wear a crown now, but you will never decide who sits next." It was a strong phrase that showed both reverence for the institution and the raw fear of succession politics. That meeting didn't help things. The list of supposed interventions went on, and according to some accounts, it ended with an event that many considered as decisive: the Queen's supposed involvement in long-term preparation for Princess Charlotte's ceremonial destiny. The report spoke about efforts to change the direction of patronages and symbolic inheritances that had been informally and customarily set aside for the following generation. William's advisors saw the apparent drive to change these chances, which included public-facing charities and future ceremonial duties, as a direct threat to his children's standing in the line of succession and to the symbolic legacy of his late mother. For a lot of people who saw the sequence, that intervention was the end of the line. The two families' professional connection fell apart. William and his counselors started to talk about their alternatives behind closed doors. Their talks were quite technical. They met with constitutional experts, retired government officials, and senior MPs to figure out what a consort could and couldn't do under a constitutional monarchy. The topic was asked in a general way: what are the constitutional limits on a consort's role? But the consequences were intentionally pragmatic. Could Parliament, the democratically elected representative body of the sovereign, intervene if the internal power dynamics inside the monarchy seemed to jeopardize the Crown's impartiality? The method required careful, deliberate thought. William did not speak out in public. Instead, the prince let a few important people in Westminster know privately that he wouldn't stop an investigation if Parliament wanted to go forward with one. That quiet erosion of family support transformed the way politics worked. Camilla's position became more vulnerable without the support of the heir apparent. What began as a private family fight and a series of tabloid tales grew to include issues of succession, constitutional propriety, and public trust, making it a problem that Parliament felt it could not ignore. Princess Anne, the Princess Royal, stepped in to help with the tensions. She is known for her responsibility, competence, and clear thinking, not for public drama. People at the institution think of Anne as someone who prioritizes responsibility and professionalism above fame. She hasn't spoken much about politics in public. When she made a sharp comment in a private chat at an Order of the Garter meeting at Windsor Castle and the line got out, it got a lot of attention since it came from someone who was renowned for primarily talking about institutional issues. Anne was recorded saying, "There are those who wear a crown without having earned it." In the small room where the gathering took place, surrounded by senior royals and knights. The comment, which was apparently recorded without her knowledge, didn't name Camilla directly, but it was clear to those who knew her who she was talking about. When it got out to the public, former royal officials and those close to the family said that Camilla and Anne's relationship was at best cold and professional. The Princess Royal's complaints were framed as institutional rather than just personal. One former staffer said it clearly: "She never spoke out in public or got in the way." But she never praised Camilla either, for Anne Diana was the soul of the future. Camilla was always the shadow. That professional chill, together with Anne's authoritative tone, added another moral frame to the dispute. Commentators on social media called Anne the true compass of the monarchy. Polls done soon after the disclosure revealed that people trusted Camilla less and respected the Princess Royal more. MPs who had been afraid to question a sitting monarch suddenly used Anne's statements in early Commons discussions. The Princess Royal's reputation for duty and lack of interest in showiness added moral and institutional weight to the claim that members of the royal family should be limited by the Crown's constitutional duties. The Prime Minister, who was in charge of the argument, couldn't just dismiss a situation of this size. The key moment occurred when the Prime Minister stood up at the dispatch box and spoke in a way that was really harsh. He said, "The monarchy must not be held hostage by unelected influence." This was not the customary way ministers express respect for the Crown's domestic matters. He asked for a re-evaluation of ceremonial titles in a modern democracy, pushing Parliament to think about whether symbolic functions had become tools of unbridled personal power. He didn't say Camilla's name, but the meaning was clear. Later, Downing Street announced that the Prime Minister had met with Prince William and his top advisors in private. The details were kept secret, but the outcome was clear. The government had gotten the heir apparent's implicit assent to go forward. The Prime Minister felt free to break with tradition and talk about the problem in Parliament since William didn't say anything. The government's case was more about defending an institution that must be responsible to the people's representatives than it was about attacking a person. The impact in Parliament was instantaneous. MPs who had been careful because they knew that for hundreds of years it had been against the law to get involved in royal issues felt safe. The argument became bigger. It stopped being just about whether one consort had gone too far and became a bigger discussion about succession openness and updating the Constitution. Should the process of succession be looked at again? Should the authority and public impact of royal leaders who are not elected be restricted by law? Those concerns which were only spoken about in scholarly legal publications and rare speeches suddenly showed up in speeches by leaders, inquiries from backbenchers, and the nightly news. Outside of Parliament, there were large public protests that showed a wide range of strong, often contradicting views. People gathered in Westminster with signs that said things like, "Down with privilege," and "Royalty must earn respect." For some people, Camilla represented an old, unaccountable system. For others, she was a person who had been hated and whose humanity mattered. The crisis had gone from being about palace politics to being about justice, openness, and the survival of an institution that had been there for hundreds of years. Inside Buckingham Palace, high-ranking courtiers and family members got ready for a constitutional fight on a scale not seen since the abdication crisis of 1936. Lawmakers were calling the monarchy to account not in the press, but in Parliament, which is the body that is constitutionally responsible for protecting the state. In that tense setting, a state dinner meant to show off British diplomacy turned into a carefully planned moment of symbolism for many people. There were heads of state and other important people from other countries at the state dinner, along with a band and a planned series of speeches and toasts. It was supposed to show that the monarchy is a nonpartisan emblem of the nation's continuance. Instead, it was the place where power was quietly passed on. Catherine, the Princess of Wales, who had mostly stayed out of the fight and had been careful about what she said in public, stepped in. She walked into the palatial ballroom, calm and collected. People were interested not just in how she acted, but also in the lover's knot tiara she wore, which Diana had worn for a long time. People often took pictures of Diana wearing the tiara, which featured delicate arches and pearl drips. It had become a symbol of a certain blend of nobility and fragility in people's minds. Many people saw Catherine wearing her tiara at that time as a purposeful, understated statement of lineage and continuance. The pictures spread quickly across the news and social media. People started using hashtags like "The Real Queen" and "Diana's Legacy" to share pictures of Catherine wearing the lover's knot tiara next to old pictures of Diana wearing the same item. People said it was one of the most important symbolic actions the monarchy has seen in decades. Catherine's decision said a lot without her saying anything. It showed that she wanted to keep the warmth and public appeal that many thought Diana had, and it was a way for the next generation to take back that emotional space. Queen Camilla did not come to the supper. Buckingham Palace said she was feeling unwell and had been told to rest. But sources close to the palace said that top courtiers had told her not to go because it would be politically dangerous. A chair that was unoccupied at the head table became a sign of loneliness. The optics were clear, one group of royal actors was there and the other wasn't, and the mood indicated that people's allegiances were changing even without any legal changes. The results of the polls done the next morning were really interesting. In some polls, more than 70% of people indicated they thought the Princess of Wales had the traits of a future queen. Support for Camilla had dropped drastically. The conversation changed from who will wear the crown to who deserves the trust, love, and legitimacy that come with it. Many people saw Catherine's dignified, silent performance as a cultural transfer of love and legitimacy, not a legal dethroning, but a change in public opinion. Then, in a shocking turn of events that many called decisive, the Royal Archives released what turned out to be a key document, a private letter from the late Queen Elizabeth II. The archivists and constitutional advisors said that this handwritten letter had been sealed with the late Queen's crest and was meant to be opened only if the monarchy's survival were in serious danger. Advisors decided that making the situation public would assist in resolving a discussion regarding institutional continuity and precedent because of how big and serious it was. There were just fragments made public, but they were enough to change the story. In calm, familiar language, Elizabeth is said to have admitted that she officially supported Camilla's position as queen consort, but privately had doubts about whether that arrangement would be appropriate for the crown's long-term institutional interests. The letter added that the late queen's private thoughts made her public choice seem more like an act of responsibility to her son's happiness and the family's unity than an unequivocal affirmation of Camilla's long-term appropriateness for the symbolic position. Titles must serve the crown, not cloud it. One passage from the letter made the dispute clear. For a king known for being discreet and writing carefully in public for his whole life, this private statement of uncertainty seemed like an explosion. It was seen as both advice and a warning, a prompt to think about whether the form of titles was more important than their purpose. Members of Parliament saw the letter as a moral and constitutional duty. Her supporters said that if Queen Elizabeth herself had spoken out, parliamentarians had to act out of respect for the institution she had defended for decades. People were already affected by Catherine's simple symbolic gesture and upset by the dossier, so they responded passionately. The hashtag #YaRespectTheQueen was popular all across the globe. Editorials were quite serious. The late Queen's comments were not meant to be criticism after the event, but rather a guiding principle with moral power. With that moral weight behind them, Parliament proceeded toward a vote that would change everything. The proceedings took a long time and were quite formal. There were evidence hearings and arguments in committee. Constitutional experts provided oral testimony. The Crown's lawyers were brought in to explain how a consort's title had been recognized and what, if any, legislative remedies were available. The debate was not silly. Did MPs lawfully go too far by voting to change a consort's status, or were they doing their constitutional duty to make sure that the state's tools remained responsible and free from uncontrolled influence? After hours of discussion in the Commons with remarks that ranged from the 1936 abdication to the necessity for 21st century changes, the motion passed with 318 votes in favor and 121 against. The number of votes showed how strongly people felt about the issue and how many parties were working together on it. Parliament has formally taken away Camilla's title and constitutional status as queen consort. The motion's words were carefully chosen to strike a balance between recognizing human connections and being clear about the Constitution. The motion gave Camilla a courtesy title that recognized her marriage and decades of public service, but it took her out of the formal order of precedence and took away her state obligations, which were considered as tools of institutional power. The change was important in terms of the law and the Constitution, and it happened right away because of the rules that were put in place. A role that had been built up over years of meticulous public relations and private accommodation was taken apart in one meeting of Parliament. Buckingham Palace replied with a serious and measured reply. That night, King Charles III spoke to the country in a message that had already been recorded. The speech was short and had a personal tone. He spoke in a voice that occasionally broke with emotion, and it held the weight of both public obligation and private anguish. "Let love remain," he remarked, "even where duty must part us." The line was meant to be both comforting and a reminder that private connections couldn't come before the law. The Crown had concluded that a partner's private position in his life could not change the public needs of the organization. Camilla made one final formal public appearance at a scheduled charity event for women in leadership. She got there late, looking agitated, and put off the speech she had planned. Cameras caught little human moments, her shaking hand as she welcomed visitors, and her failed effort to calm herself as she departed with aides. It was a situation that made people think about the personal consequences of constitutional battles, such as the private pain and shame, and reminded them that arguments about institutions are also fights about individuals. Outside the palace, people had different reactions. Some people were happy and relieved, especially those who thought that Diana's legacy had been honored and that people were starting to love the future queen again. Some people watched with sadness. A few mourners carried signs that said, "She stood by him," and "The crown breaks those who carry it." This was a reminder that many people considered Camilla a weak person who had been attacked and then publicly degraded. As is typically the case during times of national crisis, the public conversation blended logical rationale with strong emotions. The job of making changes started in the days that followed. The royal insignia and official papers were changed. State invitations, orders of precedence, and lists of state patrons were all changed. The schedules for engagements were changed, and new positions were given out to reflect the decision made by Parliament. The most obvious effect on the public was the change in focus. The Prince and Princess of Wales had moved to the center of the monarchy's present and future. They didn't get to the top by law. Instead, it was a mix of political will, public opinion, and institutional calculation. The event had an impact all throughout the Commonwealth countries. Some governors-general and prime ministers in other places openly worried about the stability of the Constitution and the idea of a domestic parliament changing the function of a consort. Some people were less involved and thought it was already resolved inside the UK's own government. In a diplomatic way, ambassadors discreetly told their capitals that the British monarchy was going through a constitutional stress test that the whole world would be watching. Legal academics and constitutionalists quickly started to talk about changes that would last a long time. Should Parliament make the function of consorts more apparent by passing laws? Should the law of succession be updated to make it clear in writing who may do certain public duties? Some people wanted a written role for a consort that spelled out what they should do and kept them from becoming involved in politics. Others worried that writing down what is already regulated by convention might have unexpected effects, making practices that need to be flexible in real time. The fallout within the palace was real and quite strong. Senior courtiers who had worked for decades had to deal with new reporting lines and public scrutiny. The morale of the staff changed. Some people thought that the legislative action broke a long-standing rule that kept the royal family from becoming involved in politics directly. Others said it was a vital measure to keep the institution honest and the public's trust. There is now an unanswered existential issue at the heart of the public debate. Was Parliament's involvement required to modernize and safeguard the crown and make sure that people are held accountable and things are clear in a democratic age? Or was it just another part in a lengthy story of how people get caught up in the harsh light of the throne and politicians need to be seen? People will argue over the answers. Legal experts will write articles, historians will compare the situation to earlier crises, and politicians will exploit the event to make bigger points about reform deference and the role of institutions that aren't elected. The royal family's first job is to keep things stable. The monarchy's strength will now be tested by how it deals with the aftermath, if senior family members can repair their professional ties, and what steps will be taken to reassure both the public and the elected state that the crown is still a stable, non-political constitutional pillar. For a lot of people, the events have made them think more deeply about symbols and authenticity. Can a family structure that is based on national love be strong when that emotion is so clearly under question? There are ultimately human stories that will last long after the headlines fade. People who support Camilla refer to her many years of public service and the tiny kind things she has done to engage with communities and charity. People who don't like her point to the dossier, the letters, and the perceived interventions as a trend that goes against the crown's neutrality. Princess Catherine, whom the public has raised to a symbolic position of moral authority, now has to meet higher expectations. Prince William has the difficult and important job of managing a contemporary monarchy while keeping his family together. King Charles must balance his love for people with his obligation to the public. The changes that come after the event will help history decide what to think about it. Will Parliament set boundaries and duties in writing? Will the palace put in place clearer rules on how to check for influence? Or will the institution use gentler restorative methods, such as new rules, changes to personnel, a renewed focus on openness and advice from impartial experts to win back the public's trust? Those questions aren't just about the law. They are moral and cultural questions about how a hereditary institution fits within a democracy that values justice and accountability. No matter what others think, the incident has already changed the course of the monarchy. The focus of popular adoration has changed, institutional processes have been put under legislative examination, and a royal consort who was previously accepted into a formal role by both the public and private sectors has been removed from that role by elected representatives. This is a defining constitutional moment because of the mix of what Parliament is doing, what people think, and how families work. The narrative is about individuals who are stuck in the systems they work for at their most basic level. The crown is still a notion as much as it is a job continuity service and national identity. But it is also a group of people who have their own weaknesses and connections. The British Constitution is slow-moving based on tradition and fashioned by a difficult balance between respect and responsibility. It has reacted in a manner that will have long-lasting effects. Depending on where you live in the country's wide and diverse moral geography, the conclusion may be seen as either a just reform or a harsh political act. For now, the monarchy has to hold on. The family must figure out how to deal with their loss, what others expect of them, and the practicality of representing the state. Parliament has created a precedent by stepping in. The people of the country have spoken about their grief and what they want. The longer arc will reveal whether trust once compromised can be restored without undermining the fundamental role of the crown as a uniting emblem transcending politics. What started as a private letter, a tiara, and a file has turned into a national discourse about how old institutions may endure in contemporary democracies and how love, responsibility, and power can often clash. Thank you for watching the video. Please let us know your thoughts and goodbye for now.